Marcus Johnson stood beside his pool, watching the scene unfold with unsettling calm. Karen Wilson, the HOA president, was shouting and pointing her finger directly at his face, while her 4 friends casually swam in his private pool. The late afternoon sun glinted off the water's surface, highlighting the audacity of their trespass. After 25 years in law enforcement, Marcus thought he'd mastered the art of restraining his anger. But today, watching this woman take liberties with his hard-earned property, he decided it was time to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. Marcus Johnson had spent his entire adult life following rules and upholding the law. 25 years as a police officer had ingrained in him a deep respect for order and justice. When he finally retired with the rank of lieutenant last spring, he hoped to spend his golden years in peace. The 3-bedroom house in Oak Hills was everything he had saved for: suburban tranquility, good schools for his 17-year-old daughter Jasmine, and yes, that private swimming pool he'd promised her when she was just a little girl. "Dad, this place is perfect," Jasmine had said when they first toured the property. Her excitement at seeing the crystal-clear pool surrounded by carefully maintained landscaping had sealed the deal for Marcus. A single father since his wife passed away 10 years ago, he'd devoted himself to providing the best for his daughter. With Jasmine preparing for college next year, this home represented the culmination of his life's work. The first month in Oak Hills had been idyllic. Neighbors brought welcome baskets, the community seemed friendly, and Marcus felt he'd finally found the perfect place to build this new chapter of his life. He even received a personal welcome from Karen Wilson, the Homeowners Association president, who invited him to attend their monthly meetings. "We're like one big family here," Karen had said, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, designer sunglasses perched on her head. "Everyone looks out for each other." She'd smiled warmly, but Marcus had spent too many years reading people not to notice how her eyes had quickly assessed him, his daughter, and their modest belongings as the movers unloaded them. At the first HOA meeting, Marcus sat quietly in the back, observing. Karen commanded the room like a seasoned politician, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than his monthly pension. The other committee members deferred to her on every decision, and Marcus couldn't help but notice how funding seemed to flow generously toward projects benefiting the north side of the neighborhood, where Karen and her friends owned property, while maintenance issues in other sections were scheduled for future review. When the financial report was presented, Marcus's professional instincts kicked in. The numbers didn't add up. The reserves seemed unusually low for the substantial HOA fees residents paid, and the allocation of maintenance funds lacked transparency. "Excuse me?" Marcus had raised his hand, old habits of meticulous record-keeping prompting him to speak. "I noticed the pool resurfacing project went $15,000 over budget, but there's no itemized breakdown of those expenses. Is that information available to residents?" The room had fallen silent. Karen's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Johnson, isn't it? We're so pleased to have a retired officer in our community," she'd said, her tone suddenly condescending. "But I assure you, our financial oversight is quite thorough. The committee approved all expenditures. If you'd like to review our process, perhaps you should consider joining one of our subcommittees before questioning established procedures." Several committee members had chuckled, and Marcus felt the subtle shift in the room. He'd made himself a target. The following week, Marcus received his first violation notice. His fence was apparently 2 inches higher than regulations permitted, a fence that had been there when he purchased the property. 3 days later, another notice arrived claiming his house trim needed repainting to match the approved color scheme. By the end of the month, he'd received 5 separate violations, each carrying escalating fines. "This is ridiculous," Jasmine said, watching her father document each notice in the same leather-bound notebook he'd carried throughout his police career. "They're obviously targeting you because you spoke up." Marcus nodded. "Document everything, Jazz. That's the first rule of building a case." The real trouble began on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had returned early from grocery shopping to find a group of people in his backyard clustered around his pool. Karen stood with a clipboard directing two men who appeared to be measuring the pool dimensions. "Excuse me," Marcus said, keeping his voice even as he approached. "May I ask what you're doing on my property?" Karen turned, appearing completely unfazed by his presence. "Ah, Mr. Johnson, we're conducting our quarterly safety inspections. HOA regulations permit access for safety compliance reviews." She handed him a paper. "Section 12, paragraph 3. You might want to familiarize yourself with it." Marcus scanned the document, his law enforcement training immediately spotting the manipulation. "This grants reasonable access with 48-hour written notice, which I never received." Karen's smile didn't waver. "The notices were sent last week. Perhaps you should check your mail more carefully. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to complete our inspection." Marcus stood his ground. "I check my mail daily. No notice was delivered. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave." Karen's expression hardened. "Mr. Johnson, I'd hate to issue another violation for interfering with HOA operations. That carries a $250 fine." She glanced meaningfully at the men beside her. "We'll be done shortly." Against his better judgment, Marcus stepped aside, watching as they completed their inspection. He photographed everything with his phone, added entries to his notebook, and made a mental note to review the HOA bylaws in detail that evening. 2 days later, the situation escalated dramatically. Marcus returned from taking Jasmine to a college prep session to find Karen and 3 women in designer swimwear lounging beside his pool. 2 of them were actually in the water, drinking what appeared to be mimosas. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus demanded, his calm facade beginning to crack. Karen reclined on one of his pool chairs, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. "Our community pool is closed for cleaning today. As HOA president, I need to verify that alternative facilities are available for residents in case of emergencies." She took a sip from her glass. "Your pool failed several safety metrics in our inspection, so we're conducting a practical assessment." "This is private property," Marcus stated firmly. "You have no right to be here. Please leave immediately." One of the women in the pool giggled. Karen sat up straight, her voice taking on an official tone. "Actually, Mr. Johnson, as outlined in Section 15 of the HOA agreement, the association has broad authority to ensure community standards. Your aggressive tone is concerning. I'd hate to file a harassment complaint." Marcus felt his blood pressure rising but maintained his composure. 25 years of dealing with confrontation had taught him when to push and when to strategize. This was definitely a moment for the latter. "I'll be reviewing those bylaws carefully," he said evenly. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you respected my private property." "Of course," Karen replied with a smirk. "We're almost finished with our assessment anyway. Ladies, I think we've gathered enough information." The women gathered their things unhurriedly, leaving empty glasses and wet towels strewn about. Before exiting through the side gate, Karen paused. "Oh, and Mr. Johnson, you might want to check your chemical balance. The water seems a bit cloudy. That could be another violation if not addressed within 48 hours. As they left, Marcus surveyed the mess they'd made. His perfectly maintained pool area was littered with their debris, and he noticed a pump panel had been left open, potentially damaging the equipment. That evening, as Marcus documented the incident, Jasmine watched with growing concern. "Dad, they can't just come into our backyard whenever they want, can they? This is harassment." Marcus looked up from his notebook. "No, they can't. What they're doing isn't just unethical, it's illegal. Trespassing at minimum." He closed his notebook decisively. "I spent my career upholding the law. I'm not about to let someone like Karen Wilson bend it to bully us out of our home." "So, what are we going to do?" Jasmine asked. Marcus's expression shifted to one his daughter recognized from years of watching him solve cases. It was the look that said he'd identified the problem and was formulating a solution. "First we gather evidence, then we build a case. And finally," he said with quiet determination, "we make sure justice is served." The violations and pool intrusions became a regular occurrence in Marcus's life. Within 3 weeks of that first confrontation, he had received 8 additional HOA notices, each more absurd than the last. One claimed his garden hose was improperly stored despite being neatly wound on a reel. Another cited him for excessive vehicle parking when Jasmine's friend had stayed overnight for a study session. The financial penalties were beginning to add up. Marcus had already paid over $800 in fines, money that was supposed to go toward Jasmine's college fund. What troubled him most, however, was the increasing boldness of Karen's trespassing. "Dad, they were here again today," Jasmine said one afternoon when Marcus returned from a meeting with his pension administrator. "4 women this time. They used our pool for nearly 2 hours." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Did you say anything to them?" "I tried. Karen said she was conducting a water quality test and that I should be grateful they're ensuring neighborhood safety." Jasmine's voice trembled slightly. "She asked if I was planning to attend community college because university might be out of reach financially for us." It felt threatening. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Don't worry about college. We'll figure this out." That evening, Marcus called his old friend David Chen, who had left the police force to practice law. After explaining the situation, David's response was immediate and clear. "This is straightforward harassment and trespass, Marcus. The HOA may have certain rights to access for legitimate inspections, but hosting pool parties isn't one of them." David paused. "But taking them to court immediately might not be the best strategy. HOAs often have substantial legal resources, and Karen could make things even more difficult for you during the process." "So what do you suggest?" Marcus asked. "Document everything, get evidence, find out if others are experiencing similar issues. HOA abuses often follow patterns. Once we have enough material, we can build a case that's too solid to dismiss." Following David's advice, Marcus installed security cameras covering his pool area and backyard. He positioned them discreetly but legally, ensuring they captured clear views of all access points. He also began keeping a detailed log of every incident, complete with times, dates, and descriptions of what was taken or damaged. The evidence accumulated quickly. Almost like clockwork, Karen and her friends would appear 3 or 4 times a week, always when they thought Marcus was away. They would use his pool, leave trash behind, and occasionally tamper with equipment. After one such visit, Marcus found his pool heater settings had been changed, causing it to run continuously for 2 days and resulting in a utility bill nearly double the normal amount. Even more disturbing were the comments Marcus picked up on his security footage. During one afternoon swim, Karen had been recorded saying, "We need to keep the pressure on until he gets the message. This neighborhood has standards to maintain." Another woman had replied, "Exactly. The last thing we need is this place turning into another Westlake." Marcus recognized the reference to a neighboring community that had become more diverse in recent years. The impact on Marcus's family life was becoming unbearable. Jasmine no longer invited friends over, embarrassed by the possibility of finding strangers in their backyard. Marcus found himself constantly checking his security app for alerts, even during important appointments. "This is exactly what they want," Marcus told Jasmine one evening. "They're trying to wear us down, make us feel unwelcome until we decide it's easier to leave." "So they win?" Jasmine asked, clearly distressed. Marcus shook his head firmly. "Not a chance. I spent my career standing up to bullies. I'm not about to let these suburban tyrants chase us out of our home." At the next HOA meeting, Marcus attempted to address the ongoing issues publicly. He waited patiently for the open comments section at the end, but Karen skillfully manipulated the agenda, extending earlier discussions until she could announce, "I'm afraid we've run out of time for open comments tonight. Please submit any concerns in writing to the board." As Marcus gathered his things to leave, a senior gentleman approached him quietly. "Lieutenant Johnson, isn't it? I'm Richard Garvey. Been living here for almost 20 years. The man spoke in a hushed tone, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I couldn't help noticing you've got some issues with our esteemed president." Marcus studied the man carefully. "You could say that." Richard handed Marcus a business card. "I was on the board before Karen took over. Maybe we should talk sometime. There's a lot about how this place operates that doesn't make it into the official minutes." Before Marcus could respond, Richard walked away, leaving him intrigued by the possibility of an ally. The next day, another violation notice arrived. This one claimed Marcus's pool exhibited evidence of improper chemical balance and required professional inspection at his expense. The irony wasn't lost on him. The chemical imbalance was likely caused by Karen and her friends using his pool without permission. The notice included a recommended pool service company, Wilson Aquatic Services, with a quote for $675. The company name immediately caught Marcus's attention. A quick online search confirmed his suspicion. The business was registered to James Wilson, Karen's husband. "They're not even trying to hide the conflict of interest," Marcus muttered, adding the information to his growing file. That weekend, Jasmine was scheduled to visit a potential college campus, and Marcus had planned to accompany her. At the last minute, he decided to change their plans. "Jez, would you mind if your Aunt Lisa took you to the campus tour instead?" he asked. "I think I need to stay home and handle something important." "Is this about Karen and the HOA?" Jasmine asked perceptively. Marcus nodded. "I need to gather some specific evidence. It might be easier if they think the house is empty." After seeing Jasmine off with his sister, Marcus parked his car a few blocks away at a neighbor's house and returned home through a back entrance. He settled into his home office, which had a clear view of the pool area, and waited. As he had anticipated, Karen arrived around noon with 5 other women and what appeared to be a small catering setup. They accessed his backyard through the side gate, using what must have been a duplicate key, and proceeded to set up for what looked like a full-fledged pool party. Marcus recorded everything, taking detailed notes as the women made themselves comfortable, unpacked coolers of food and alcohol, and treated his property as their own private resort. Their conversation, picked up clearly by his security system, revealed this wasn't a spontaneous gathering. "The fundraiser committee will be so impressed you secured such a lovely venue for our pre-planning session," one woman said, raising a glass of wine. Karen laughed. "One of the perks of managing the HOA. Besides, Mr. Johnson is out for the weekend with his daughter. He'll never know we were here." Another woman, whom Marcus recognized as a member of the HOA board, looked slightly uncomfortable. "Are you sure this is allowed, Karen? It seems a bit beyond the scope of inspection rights." Karen waved dismissively. "Don't worry about it. What's he going to do, call the police? That would be rich." The women laughed. "Besides, we're doing him a favor. His pool failed inspection last week. Consider this our way of testing whether it's safe now." Marcus continued documenting as they spent nearly 4 hours on his property. When they finally left, they made no effort to clean up, leaving behind empty bottles, food containers, and wet towels strewn across his patio. Once they were gone, Marcus carefully photographed the mess and collected some of the items they'd left behind, including a clipboard containing what appeared to be official HOA letterhead with notes about upcoming inspections of several other properties. The following day, Marcus met with Richard Garvey at a coffee shop across town. The older man seemed nervous but determined. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her," Richard said after Marcus described his experiences. "Karen took over the board 3 years ago through what I can only describe as a hostile takeover. She scheduled the annual election meeting when many residents were away for spring break, brought in a bunch of her friends as proxy voters, and ousted most of the longtime board members." "And since then?" Marcus prompted. Richard sighed. "Since then, it's been her personal fiefdom. The HOA fees have increased by 40%, with minimal improvements to show for it. Meanwhile, her husband's company gets most of the maintenance contracts, her brother-in-law's landscaping firm handles all the common areas, and anyone who questions the arrangements finds themselves drowning in violation notices." "That sounds like a clear conflict of interest," Marcus observed. "It's worse than that," Richard said, lowering his voice despite the privacy of their corner table. "I believe she's been selectively targeting certain homeowners, particularly new residents, who don't fit her vision of the right kind of neighbor." "You mean minorities?" Marcus asked directly. Richard nodded grimly. "The Chens on Maple Drive? Lovely family. Moved here from San Francisco. They received so many violations they sold at a loss after just 8 months. Same with the Rodriguez family on Oakmont. And the gay couple who bought the old Peterson place? They're currently fighting their third landscaping violation this month. Marcus leaned forward. Do you have any documentation from your time on the board? Anything showing the financial situation before Karen took over? Richard hesitated, then pulled out a USB drive. I kept copies of all the financial reports during my tenure as treasurer. I've also been quietly tracking the pattern of violations and property turnovers. It's all here. He slid the drive across the table. Be careful, Marcus. Karen has connections with local officials. Her brother-in-law is on the city council, and her husband golfs with the district judge. Marcus pocketed the drive. I spent my career building cases against people who thought they were untouchable. Evidence speaks louder than connections. Armed with Richard's information and his own growing documentation, Marcus arranged another meeting with his attorney friend David. After reviewing the materials, David's assessment was blunt. You've got enough here to pursue legal action on multiple fronts: trespassing, harassment, possible discrimination, and what looks like financial impropriety within the HOA, David said. But going to court should be our last resort. These cases can drag on for years. What do you suggest? Marcus asked. A two-pronged approach, David replied. First, we prepare for potential legal action by continuing to build our case. Second, we look for leverage that might resolve this more quickly. He tapped the financial documents from Richard. These discrepancies in the HOA finances could be particularly useful. If Karen is indeed misappropriating funds or directing contracts improperly, that could constitute fraud. For the next 2 weeks, Marcus continued his documentation while David quietly reached out to other affected homeowners. Meanwhile, the violations and pool intrusions continued, though Marcus was careful not to reveal that he knew about them. Each incident simply added to his growing case file. Then came the turning point. While reviewing one of Richard's financial spreadsheets, Marcus noticed a recurring monthly payment to a company called WLC that had begun shortly after Karen took control of the HOA board. The payments, $2,500 per month, were categorized as management services, but none of the previous financial reports had included such an expense. A deep search revealed that WLC Consulting was registered to Wendy Louise Carter, Karen's maiden name. The company had no website, no public clients, and appeared to exist solely to receive payments from the Oak Hills HOA. This is what we needed, David said when Marcus showed him the discovery. This goes beyond HOA politics. This is potentially criminal misappropriation of funds. So we go to the police? Marcus asked. David shook his head. Not yet. First, we need to connect all the dots. I suggest we bring in a forensic accountant to review all these financial records. If there's a pattern of self-dealing and misappropriation, we'll have a much stronger position. The forensic accountant's preliminary report exceeded their expectations. Over the 3 years of Karen's presidency, nearly $175,000 of HOA funds had been directed to companies connected to her family members, often without competitive bidding or board approval. The mysterious WLC Consulting had received over $90,000 with no discernible services provided. This goes way beyond petty HOA tyranny, Marcus said, reviewing the report. This is organized fraud. David nodded grimly. And it explains why she's so aggressive about issuing violations and collecting fines. It's not just about control, it's about generating revenue she can misdirect. Armed with this information, Marcus was ready to confront Karen, but David urged caution. We need one more piece of the puzzle. Someone on the inside who can confirm these payments weren't legitimately approved by the board. That someone turned out to be Thomas Reynolds, the former HOA accountant who had been replaced shortly after questioning some of Karen's financial decisions. After being contacted by David, Thomas agreed to meet with them at his office downtown. I always knew something wasn't right, Thomas said, reviewing the forensic accountant's findings. Karen would present pre-assignment approval forms for these payments, claiming they had been discussed in executive sessions I wasn't privy to. When I started asking questions, I was told my services were no longer required. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about this? David asked. Thomas hesitated only briefly. Yes. What she's doing isn't just unethical, it's criminal. And frankly, I'm still angry about how I was pushed out after 15 years of service to the community. With Thomas's testimony and the forensic evidence, Marcus and David had built a formidable case. But before they could implement their plan, Karen escalated the situation dramatically. Marcus received a certified letter from the HOA demanding payment of $4,750 in accumulated fines and threatening legal action if not paid within 10 days. Attached was a notice that the HOA board had approved placing a lien on his property for the unpaid amount, a move that could potentially force a foreclosure if left unresolved. "This is her nuclear option," David said when Marcus forwarded him the letter. "She's trying to force you out before we can act." Marcus felt a cold anger settle over him. She's chosen the wrong person to intimidate. That weekend, Marcus noticed unusual activity on his security cameras. A large delivery truck had parked in front of his house, and workers were unloading what appeared to be catering equipment, tables and chairs. Karen directed them toward his backyard, pointing to areas around his pool. Marcus watched in disbelief as his property was transformed into an event venue. Tents were erected on his lawn, a portable bar was set up beside his pool, and string lights were hung across his patio. It was clear Karen was preparing for a substantial gathering. When the workers had left, Marcus approached Karen, who was inspecting the setup with another woman. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he asked calmly. Karen turned, momentarily startled, before regaining her composure. "Mr. Johnson, I thought you were away this weekend." "Clearly. Now would you like to explain why my backyard has been turned into a party venue without my knowledge or permission?" The woman with Karen, whom Marcus recognized as Jennifer Benson, the wife of a city councilman, looked uncomfortable and quickly excused herself. Once alone, Karen's demeanor changed. "The annual HOA Leadership Appreciation event is tomorrow evening. Your property was selected as this year's venue." "Selected by whom? Certainly not by me," Marcus replied evenly. "By the board, of course. As per Section 17 of the Covenant, community events take precedence over individual property restrictions during designated community functions." Karen's smile was cold. "Perhaps if you'd paid your outstanding fines, we might have chosen another location." Marcus maintained his calm. "There is no Section 17 that grants any such authority, and we both know it. This is trespassing, plain and simple." Karen's smile vanished. "Listen carefully, Mr. Johnson. This event will be attended by city council members, local judges, and business leaders who contribute significantly to this community. If you disrupt it, I guarantee you'll regret it far more than paying those fines." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "People like you need to understand how things work here. This isn't one of your urban neighborhoods where anything goes. Oak Hills has standards, traditions, and a certain character we intend to preserve." The implication was unmistakable, but Marcus refused to be provoked. "I understand perfectly how things work, Miss Wilson. In fact, I understand it better than you might think." Karen's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you have until 5 p.m. today to remove everything from my property. After that, I'll consider it abandoned and dispose of it as I see fit." Marcus's tone was professional, the same one he had used countless times during his law enforcement career when laying down the law to those who thought themselves above it. "You wouldn't dare," Karen hissed. "Try me," Marcus replied simply. "And while you're having everything removed, you might want to start gathering your financial records as well. The board will be needing them soon." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Karen's face. "What are you talking about?" "Wellesley Consulting," Marcus said quietly. "Wendy Louise Carter, your maiden name, isn't it? Interesting services they provide for $2,500 a month. I'm curious what the rest of the board will think when they see the documentation." The color drained from Karen's face. "You're bluffing. You can't possibly." "I have copies of everything, Karen. Every transaction, every violation notice, every email. And I'm not the only one asking questions anymore." Marcus glanced at his watch. 4:59 and counting. "I suggest you start making calls." Karen stormed off, furiously dialing her phone. Within an hour, the workers had returned and begun dismantling the event setup. Marcus observed the process from his window, making detailed notes about everything that had been placed on his property and subsequently removed. That evening, he received an unexpected visit from Richard Garvey, who appeared at his door looking agitated. "Karen called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," Richard explained. "She's claiming there's been a security breach of confidential HOA information and that she needs emergency powers to address it. I think she's going to try to destroy records or move money around." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Then it's time to accelerate our timeline." He called David, quickly explaining the situation. After a brief discussion, they agreed on a new plan. David would file for an emergency injunction first thing in the morning to prevent any destruction of HOA records. Meanwhile, Marcus would implement what he had privately come to think of as Operation Pool Party, a counter-move he had been preparing for just such an escalation. Early the next morning, before Karen's emergency meeting could convene, Marcus carefully added a special dye to his pool, a non-toxic, temporary colorant that would stain neither skin nor clothing but would turn the water a brilliant blue. Beside the pool, he placed a prominent sign, "Caution, pool undergoing special maintenance, chemical treatment, in progress, authorized personnel only." Then he positioned himself in his home office with a clear view of the pool, opened his notebook to a fresh page, and waited. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the community center. If Karen followed her usual pattern when feeling threatened, she would seek the comfort and validation of her inner circle, which meant a high probability of an impromptu gathering at what had become their favorite unauthorized venue. As if on cue, at 9:15 a.m., his security system alerted him to movement at the side gate. Karen had arrived with 3 other women, all board members, and was using her unauthorized key to access his backyard. Marcus watched through the security feed as Karen led the group to his pool area, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. They appeared to be in the midst of a strategy session, and Karen seemed to be reassuring them about something. One of the women pointed questioningly at the warning sign, but Karen dismissed it with a wave. "Just another of his intimidation tactics," Marcus heard her say through the audio feed. "He's trying to scare us off because he knows we have every right to be here." To demonstrate her confidence, Karen slipped off her shoes and dangled her feet in the water. "See? Perfectly fine. He probably just added some extra chlorine and is trying to make a big deal of it." Encouraged by Karen's boldness, the other women made themselves comfortable around the pool. One of them even waded in up to her knees, commenting on how refreshing the water felt. Marcus continued documenting as the impromptu meeting progressed. The women discussed their strategy for handling the security breach, with Karen instructing them to deny any knowledge of financial irregularities if questioned. She assured them that any problematic records were being taken care of, and that her brother-in-law on the city council would run interference if necessary. What Karen didn't realize was that the special dye Marcus had added to the pool was designed to activate gradually with exposure to sunlight. As their meeting continued, the water began to transform from its normal clear blue to a much more intense, vibrant shade. The woman who had waded in was the first to notice, letting out a startled cry as she looked down at her now bright blue legs. Karen, who had been soaking her feet the entire time, jumped up in alarm, but it was too late. Her feet and the hem of her expensive white linen dress had already taken on a distinct blue tint. Panic ensued as the women scrambled to get away from the water, checking themselves for stains and yelling accusations at each other for not taking the warning signs seriously. Karen's pristine platinum blonde hair, which had dipped into the water when she leaned over, now sported striking blue streaks. In the midst of their chaos, Marcus calmly walked out to the pool area, notebook in hand. "Ladies," he said pleasantly, "I see you've ignored the clearly posted warning about the pool maintenance. I'm curious what part of authorized personnel only was unclear." Karen's face contorted with rage, the effect somewhat undermined by her blue-streaked hair and stained feet. "You did this deliberately. This is assault. I'll have you arrested." "For maintaining my pool with non-toxic, safety-approved chemicals on my own property?" Marcus replied evenly. "I don't think so. However, your unauthorized presence here, again, is definitely trespassing, and given your feet and hair, I'd say I have irrefutable evidence this time." He held up his phone, showing that he'd been recording the entire incident, including your very interesting conversation about destroying HOA records and having your brother-in-law run interference. "I wonder what the other homeowners would think about that." Karen's expression shifted from rage to fear as she realized the implications. You can't prove anything about the records. Perhaps not from this video alone," Marcus conceded, "but combined with the financial documentation I've already gathered, the testimony of your former accountant, and the forensic audit currently underway, I think we have more than enough to open a formal investigation." One of the other women, the HOA treasurer, paled visibly. "What financial documentation? What audit?" Marcus turned to her. "Mr. Peterson, did you know that over $90,000 of HOA funds have been paid to a shell company owned by Karen? Or that her husband's pool company has received contracts at 40% above market rate without competitive bidding? The paper trail is quite clear." Ms. Peterson turned to Karen in shock. "Is this true? You told us those contracts were the lowest bids." Karen's composure cracked completely. "He's lying. He has no proof." "Actually," came a voice from the side gate, "he has quite a lot of proof." David Chen stood there alongside Thomas Reynolds and two other individuals, one wearing an ID badge identifying him as a county financial crimes investigator. "Karen Wilson," the investigator said formally, "we have some questions regarding the financial activities of the Oak Hills Homeowners Association. We'd like you to accompany us to answer them." Karen looked frantically from the investigator to her now blue-tinged appearance. "I need to change first. I can't go anywhere looking like this." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," the investigator replied coolly. "We're executing a warrant to secure all HOA financial records, including those at your residence. You'll need to come with us now." As Karen was escorted out, blue feet, blue-streaked hair, and all, Marcus turned to the remaining board members. "I believe there's still an HOA meeting scheduled for 10 a.m., he said. "Given the circumstances, you might want to add a few items to the agenda." The emergency HOA meeting that morning turned into something far different than what Karen had planned. Instead of quickly pushing through measures to give her emergency powers, the remaining board members found themselves facing an angry crowd of homeowners who had received an anonymous email detailing financial irregularities and attaching copies of incriminating documents. Marcus arrived just as the meeting was descending into chaos. Community members were shouting questions about misappropriated funds, demanding explanations for excessive violation fines, and calling for immediate resignations. Ms. Peterson, still visibly shaken by the morning's revelations, attempted to maintain order, but was clearly overwhelmed. When Marcus entered, a hush fell over the room. Richard Garvey stood up and addressed the crowd. "For those who don't know him, this is Marcus Johnson. He's the one who uncovered the financial discrepancies we're discussing today." All eyes turned to Marcus. Without Karen's intimidating presence, people seemed eager for leadership and answers. He hadn't planned to take a central role, but sometimes circumstances demanded action. "I didn't set out to investigate the HOA," Marcus said, his voice carrying the calm authority developed over decades in law enforcement. "I simply wanted to understand why I was being targeted with violations and why my private property was repeatedly being trespassed upon." He laid out the facts methodically, explaining how his investigation had uncovered not just personal harassment, but systematic financial abuse affecting the entire community. "This isn't about one homeowner's dispute with the HOA president," Marcus concluded. "This is about accountability, transparency, and ensuring that the organization meant to protect our community's interests actually does so. The impact was immediate. The board voted unanimously to suspend Karen from her position pending a full investigation and to cooperate fully with the county authorities. They appointed an interim president, Richard Garvey, whose institutional knowledge and previous board experience made him the logical choice, and established a committee to review all financial records and violation notices issued during Karen's tenure. In the days that followed, the full extent of Karen's scheme became clear. The forensic audit revealed that she had diverted nearly $250,000 of HOA funds over 3 years through inflated contracts to family-owned businesses and fake consulting fees. Moreover, the violation fee structure had been manipulated to target specific homeowners, with the collected fines often going into accounts only Karen could access, rather than the general HOA. Most disturbing were the emails recovered from the HOA computer system. They revealed explicit discussions about using violation notices to drive out undesirable residents who didn't fit Karen's vision for the community. The language in some of these exchanges was openly discriminatory, referring to the need to maintain the neighborhood's traditional character and quality of residence. 2 weeks after the initial revelations, Marcus received a visit from David Chen, who brought news about the legal proceedings. Karen's been formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of funds, David informed him. The prosecutor is considering adding civil rights violations based on the evidence of targeted harassment against minorities. What about her conspirators? Marcus asked. Her husband is also facing charges related to the fraudulent contracts. Several board members have agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. As for her brother-in-law on the city council, he's announced he won't seek re-election and is distancing himself from the whole affair. Marcus nodded, satisfied that justice was being served through proper channels. And what about our civil case? He asked. David smiled. That's actually why I'm here. Karen's attorney has approached me about a settlement. They're desperate to avoid additional publicity, especially with the criminal charges pending. The settlement offer exceeded Marcus's expectations. In addition to a substantial financial compensation for the harassment and trespassing, Karen was required to issue a public apology and pay restitution to all homeowners who had been unfairly targeted with violations. There's one more thing, David added. The prosecutor wants you to consider serving as a witness for the state in the criminal case. Your background in law enforcement makes you an ideal witness. Marcus agreed without hesitation. His years of building cases had taught him the importance of seeing justice through to completion. The neighborhood transformed in the aftermath of Karen's removal. Under Richard's interim leadership, the HOA instituted new transparency measures, including publicly accessible financial records and a requirement for multiple bids on all contracts. The discriminatory violation enforcement was replaced with a fair, uniform approach, applied equally to all homeowners. Most significantly, the community itself began to heal. Neighbors who had been intimidated into silence started speaking to one another again. Those who had been considering selling their homes decided to stay. The Rodriguez family, who had been fighting constant violations, finally felt comfortable finishing the backyard playground for their children without fear of arbitrary fines. 3 months after the confrontation at his pool, Marcus hosted a community barbecue in his backyard. The once contested pool was now the centerpiece of a celebration attended by neighbors from across Oak Hills. Jasmine, home from her first semester at university, with a full scholarship she'd earned, helped serve drinks and recounted the blue pool incident to delighted guests who hadn't heard the full story. During the party, Thomas Reynolds approached Marcus with a glass of lemonade. You know, when Karen fired me, I was convinced I'd never set foot in this neighborhood again, the former accountant said. Now look at us. The HOA's finances are back in order and people actually smile at each other on the street. It's amazing what transparency and fairness can accomplish, Marcus replied. Speaking of which, Thomas continued, several people have mentioned that you should run for HOA president when the special election happens next month. Marcus laughed. I didn't move here to start a second career in community politics. Maybe not, Thomas conceded. But sometimes the best leaders are those who never sought the position in the first place. Marcus was saved from responding by Richard Garvey calling for everyone's attention. The interim president raised his glass in a toast. "To Marcus Johnson," Richard announced, "who reminded us all that standing up to bullies isn't just about personal justice. It's about protecting our entire community." Applause erupted around the pool. Marcus accepted the recognition with a humble nod, though he felt somewhat uncomfortable being the center of attention. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Jasmine sat beside her father at the edge of the pool, both dangling their feet in the now clear water. "You know what I realized, Dad," she said thoughtfully. "What you did here wasn't really that different from your police work. You saw something wrong, gathered evidence, and made sure justice was served." Marcus considered this. "I suppose old habits die hard, though I have to admit the blue pool trick wasn't exactly standard police procedure." Jasmine laughed. "That was my favorite part. Did you see Karen's face when she realized her platinum hair had blue streaks?" "The look was priceless," Marcus agreed with a smile. "But more importantly, it provided irrefutable evidence of trespassing that even her connections couldn't explain away." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset reflect off the water. "So what happens now?" Jasmine finally asked. "With Karen and everything?" "She'll likely serve some time, though probably not as much as she deserves," Marcus replied. "Her husband's business is already failing without the HOA contracts. Most importantly, they've sold their house. I heard they're moving to another state to try and make a fresh start." "Good riddance," Jasmine said emphatically. "Indeed, though I almost feel sorry for whatever community they end up in next," Marcus mused. A week later, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded from the prosecutor's office and bore the return address of a law firm in Phoenix, Arizona. Inside was a brief note from Karen Wilson. "Mr. Johnson," it read, "as part of my plea agreement, I am required to apologize to those affected by my actions. Consider this fulfillment of that obligation." The terseness of the message made Marcus smile. Even in defeat, Karen couldn't bring herself to show genuine remorse. He filed the letter in the back of his case notebook as the final entry in what had become quite a comprehensive record. That evening, as Marcus sat on his patio enjoying the peace of his backyard, his phone chimed with a news alert. The headline read, "HOA President in Phoenix, under investigation following complaints from new resident." The article detailed how a former police lieutenant who had recently moved to the area had raised concerns about financial irregularities in his HOA, leading to a preliminary investigation. The HOA president, recently arrived from out of state, had denied all allegations. Marcus couldn't help but laugh. Some people never learned, but thankfully there were always others willing to stand up for what was right. The next day, Richard stopped by with news that the HOA nominating committee had unanimously put Marcus's name forward for the presidency, despite his protests. "Just consider it," Richard urged. "The voting isn't for another 3 weeks. The community trusts you, and honestly, we need someone with your integrity and attention to detail." Marcus promised to think about it, though he remained unconvinced. His retirement plan had never included community politics. Still, as he looked around at his peaceful backyard, the pristine pool, and the neighborhood that now felt truly welcoming, he couldn't deny the satisfaction that came from making a difference. Later that week, Marcus received an email from the Phoenix police lieutenant mentioned in the news article. The message was brief. "Saw your name connected to a similar case here in Phoenix. Any advice would be appreciated." Marcus smiled as he began typing his response. "Document everything, build your case methodically, and if all else fails, I know a great recipe for pool." After all, 25 years in law enforcement had taught him that justice sometimes required creativity, patience, and a willingness to stand firm against those who abused their power. Whether as a police officer or a retired homeowner, that commitment to fairness never changed. As Marcus finished his reply and clicked send, he found himself opening the HOA election information packet that Richard had left. Perhaps there was something to be said for a second career after all, especially when it meant protecting the community he now called home. "What do you think, Jazz?" he called to his daughter, who was studying at the kitchen table. Should your old man run for HOA president? Jasmine grinned. Absolutely, but promise me one thing. What's that? Keep the pool dye. You never know when you might need it again. Marcus laughed. Deal. Some lessons are best taught in living color. Have you ever experienced or witnessed an HOA abuse their power? How did you handle the situation? Share your story in the comments below.